Hello, welcome everyone to the Cluster Add-ons meeting. Today's August the 6th, and Jeff has an agenda item.
So last time we met, we talked about a few things we wanted from KubeBuilder. So I went to the KubeBuilder meeting to talk to them. The result was a couple separate things. One was talking about component config, and the context around that was, we think there's a general set of things you'll want to tweak about, a KubeBuilder-based controller. But we also think that each controller will probably also want to layer add config to that. So I sort of discussed some of that use case with them and Solly, and there's actually some activity in the issue this morning. So it is on their radar to some extent. But if there are maybe some more concrete use cases we could provide, we gave some sort of straw man examples. I'm sure they'd be receptive to that. I linked to the issue in the notes. The other bit was talking about pattern add-ons. This is a thing that we've known about for a long time, is that we want to add a flag to KubeBuilder to spit out something a little more specialized. In our case, all the scaffolding for add-ons. But in general, the KubeBuilder expects this to be like a common occurrence. Solly had mentioned he was going to look into sort of a plugin model, though I don't think there's been any activity there. So we may just want to poke it and say, well, here's a plugin model, if statements.
Yeah, thank you for doing that, Jeff. I wasn't able to attend the meeting last, whenever it was, time. The component the cluster API, whatever, you know what I mean. The KubeBuilder meeting, there we go. I'll get there in the end. Last time, so yes, I will try to attend this time. I do agree with you that having a bunch of examples in the code will probably make it easier than designing a generic plugin mechanism. So in other words, I would argue that this is a first step towards it. We don't technically need to integrate with KubeBuilder, right? The KubeBuilder is a CLI tool that effectively scaffolds some stuff, but it then uses a well-separated out controller runtime type library, so we could easily build KubeBuilder add-ons or whatever we want, KubeBuilder-add-ons or whatever we want to call it, and just have it be completely separate. And I think we should talk about that with them. Is like, what do they like? Is it what would they sort of see as the best option there? Because we do want to unblock ourselves, I suggest, and we could always, yeah, I think so. I'm going to try to attend. Is it? It looks like it's not tomorrow, though, is it? Do you know?
Yeah, when is the meeting? I don't have this on my calendar still.
It's every other.
Yeah, maybe it's next week.
It's the second Tuesday, or I'm sorry, the second Wednesday of every month. So it would be the 14th this month, because technically the first Wednesday is the 7th.
So it's only every month. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we should probably could do it on GitHub then, I guess. Because also it clashes with Cluster API, which is, I imagine, unfortunate for, well, certainly unfortunate for me. I imagine it's unfortunate for some other people here.
So just wanted to mention that from the SDK side with KubeBuilder, we met with them when we were out in San Francisco we did like an SDK face-to-face. So we met with the KubeBuilder guys and Solly and Sunil, and we also have similar use cases with the operator SDK, like the Ansible and Helm operators. So we also want this plugin concept, and we've been planning on at least putting a proof of concept together to kind of figure out what that would look like. And we definitely realized that the add-on operator is one of those use cases as well. So I think we're kind of all on the same page in terms of like, how do we extend KubeBuilder to support some of these other use cases. The one wrinkle with the Ansible and Helm operators that we'd like to see, and there's still some debate about how this would work, is that right now when the SDK scaffolds a new Helm or Ansible project, there's no Go code at all. It's basically like a Docker file with a base image that has the Go code in it. And the project then is just basically a Docker file with some files that get built into an image that runs the operator. So we're going to have to figure out with the KubeBuilder team and with you guys if there's a way to integrate that type of project, like a non-Go project, in with KubeBuilder, or whether it really needs to be like a Go only thing where we're just changing out like some Go code to scaffold like in your case, a controller for the add-on operator versus a Go controller for a Helm operator versus a Go controller for an Ansible operator. So just wanted to throw that out there. We're thinking about the same things. So just FYI, yeah, we're definitely interested as well.
I'm particularly intrigued by the first half of what you brought up, Jeff, which is that did Solly have any comments on generating component config APIs?
I did a little bit, but I don't think I explained it well, to be completely honest.
Okay.
He sort of had this initial opinion of like, well, you just make a struct and serialize the struct and Go with JSON type thing. And I was like, well, I think we'll want like the type meta and that sort of stuff.
Yes, yeah. Using API machinery for that struct is the big deal.
Yeah.
And that's not simple.
Yeah, it doesn't feel simple, even when it's all working perfect. So I think we should, maybe it would be good to present that again, maybe in the next meeting if we go there and poke them about this patterns thing anyways.
Okay.
Because I don't think I did a great job explaining it.
Yeah, because I built a component config thing like just 2 weeks ago, and it was a total pain in the butt. So
that would be great. That if we could like specifically highlight exactly the steps you had to take, I think that would be great.
Yeah, I mean it's even got per commit steps it's the add-on installer POC. So it has a component config, a very simple one, and was not easy to do. So I mean we've got all these other Kubernetes components that have these configs, but how did they get there? I have no idea. I think probably the same way I did it, which is like copy and paste and a lot of sed. So, yeah. Okay. The other part of that I would be really interested in is that KubeBuilder v2 structures APIs very differently from most Kubernetes APIs. So I'm a little interested in how we're supposed to lay out the internal versus external types, but we'll see what Solly says. I'll join next week for sure. Does anyone have the link to the meeting doc for that?
Yeah, I do. I can send it just a sec. I'll send it in the chat.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, no problem. You might need to be a member of the KubeBuilder Google group to access it.
Yeah, I'll probably have to. Oh, there's a Google group specifically for KubeBuilder or for API machinery?
This is for KubeBuilder specifically.
Interesting. Okay. This doesn't follow our community guidelines for Google Doc permissions. It should be view only for everybody on the internet.
Sean, are you an owner of that file? Can you change that?
Yeah, I think I can.
A little bit down in that paragraph shows all the suggested permissions. If the document happens to be owned by Google, that's problematic.
Jeff, is this all you had, or is there anything where you need help from anyone?
That's all I had to sort of report back from last time.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So I think the next thing on the agenda was my item. Well, it's not really my item. But yeah, so Evan Cordell and Jimmy Zielinski, are either of them on the call right now? Hey, Evan, you're there,
This
right?
is Evan. Yeah, I'm on the call.
Yeah, do you want to talk about KPG? I just built it, and it's
Oh, cool.
pretty cool.
Sure, I will share my screen really quick.
I added this to the agenda for you, but I mean, if you don't
Thank
want
you.
to talk
Yeah.
about it, it's fine.
No, I jumped in to add it and I saw it was already there. There we go. So this is sort of a proof of concept of using ORAS, which is the DAYS project that talks OCI, to try packaging up basically just kube manifests, push them around. This specifically adds some support for customized, but the really high level goal was just to have an artifact that we can talk about as like an entity with an identity. So I was hoping that this has some overlap with kube add-ons. I think the specifics of like having a tool that, for example, is here in my namespace, that doesn't matter. Like I'm just hoping that we can figure out what experience we want for this type of thing. But the basic is you have a set of YAML files, you push them up. This builds an OCI image manifest with layer media types that are based on whatever the actual content is. So in this case, I just have one for kube YAML and one for specifically the customization file. So the idea is that when you're parsing this somewhere else later with another tool, you have a lot more contextual information about it, but more importantly, you have an identity to talk about it with other tooling. So this was directly in response to an issue in, I think, the kube add-ons Git repo that suggested just trying this out and seeing what it looked like. So this is what it looks like. I wanted to know if anyone had any feedback on this approach. This is essentially the same approach that Helm v3 is looking at taking. So that's why it's really interesting for talking about operators and add-ons as well.
Yeah, I had a few questions when working with this. Was did you add support, or does it implicitly support like directories? Like if I wanted to package like some smaller or like extending layers in subdirectories, is that a thing?
Yeah, you can absolutely. It's sort of on you to decide how to pack and unpack each layer, and then assign it.
Okay, yeah. So I'm just going to pass it that example directory, and that actually recurses through everything underneath.
Exactly. Yeah.
Does it follow? Does it follow symlinks? I don't know how customized does that.
I'm just using the Go file walker, and I don't remember off the top of my head if that follows some links or not.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's probably a small enough detail. But,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you and I had chatted about eventually building an extension to customize, or or just maybe just patching Customize to where you could use this in the resources list, right?
Yeah, so I think there's even a story somewhere in an issue somewhere on the Customize Git repo that says like, hey, what if instead of a Git repo, we could inherit from a base that is packaged as an OCI image?
There's already an issue for that?
I think so, but
Oh, nice.
I don't have it at the ready. I could be making it up.
Yeah, because all we would need to figure out at that point, I mean, you have push and pull of these files working with the registry, and yeah, I mean, all you would need to do at that point is just have some kind of ref that says, oh, I'm not working with the Git repo, I'm not working with the local file system, I need to go pull an OCI image, and then it should even work recursively, right?
It should. I don't know if Customize puts any limits on that. This is probably the extent to which I've played with Customize, is packaging stuff with this and testing it out. But
I think the only limit is that when, so there is an interesting option in Customize build that I just noticed today, and that I think is how it does the security model. It's called Customize build. It's called load restrictor, -- load _ restrictor.
Right.
And I think that always is enabled when you are doing a network operation. So with the GitHub stuff, or like any Git repo, the load restrictor is enabled, which means it can't go past the directory root. So we would just need to make sure that when we're loading from OCI that that's true.
Yeah, if we try and implement this in Customize, we should be able to reuse all that. Right?
Yeah. And it should also support the only thing that's really weird about this UX is Customize uses that HashiCorp library where you specify the Git repo, and then like you can even provide subdirectories and all that. So we would have to invent something similar to that, but for OCI.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know about that.
They don't support like a struct, right? Which is like, hey, like I want my thing to come from here, and then I want like these details about how to unpack it. They use like a long string that needs to be parsed in order to get to the right place. When I built this in Bash originally, I was just like parsing the prefix and then matching it against like Scopio prefixes. I just like had a list of them that I exported, and then like I basically had an if statement outside of Customize that would go unpack the directory onto the local file system and then pass the local file system to Customize, but it was really quite hacky. So
I think so. My follow-up questions about this work would be like, what is this particular group's opinion on its value to the problems that are trying to be solved here? I brought it up not just because of the issue in the Git repo, but also like I believe it was Justin gave a demo a while ago of the KubeBuilder declarative pattern, which in my mind is like also a way to collect up some YAML files and apply them to a cluster in a specific way. So the part that's missing from this is like the operator side. Like this is really just talking about packaging, but you could pretty easily imagine like an operator that takes a reference to one or more of these and does something useful with them. So that's kind of where I was thinking this related. But if I'm totally off base, that would be a good time to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly compatible with the ideas of the add-on operators as a source of the manifests in the same way that it is with KubeBuilder. I have to be honest, I don't get why people want to do this, but I know a lot of people want to do this. So I think from that point of view, like there's no reason not to support it. But yeah, I think like there are certainly advantages to having containers, right? Like they are understood and they are versioned to an extent, and yeah, so there were definitely advantages. it's a nice like bundle. It's easier to pull, I guess. There's an existing workflow.
The
I
thing
think
that's interesting. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just the existing infrastructure portion of it is quite valuable, because when you talk about using Git or directories, the Git thing for most people is way more maintainable and is going to encourage better practices. But then when you talk about marrying a Git repo with a Kubernetes cluster, like that's a very like imposing requirement on somebody's workload. Some people don't use Git. Somebody, probably has to go through like an enterprise security audit and all that. But like, in order to have a Kubernetes cluster, you have to have a registry. It's just not going to work unless you're like pushing tarballs to every node. And so somebody's already has the infrastructure to distribute these packages, I think, is one really big benefit.
Yeah, and the other side is like, if the other mechanisms for like taking a static set of YAML or manifests and applying them to the cluster tend to involve mounting them into an image of some sort that does something with them. Like the declarative KubeBuilder pattern, for example. And so this sort of could provide a way to do that a little more generically. And in my mind, the interesting part is having an identity that exists outside the cluster, like being able to talk about a set of things that are not local to the one cluster.
Yeah, those are fair points. I understand those. I think the declarative pattern today does use a local file system, but yes, there could be other backends, like HTTPS is the one that we have long threatened to build, but I don't know if we've actually built it yet. But this could certainly be another backend. I feel like don't take my objection too seriously. I'm just like, but yes, like if this, it sounds like there are valid reasons for doing so, and I don't see any reason why this is incompatible with anything. Like this could be another backend alongside HTTPS for pulling these manifests from, even in the, whether it's KubeBuilder or whether it's declarative add-on pattern. I think this is, yeah, great.
I also think it makes a lot more sense, like, to use Kustomize as a base for manifests than just like having anonymous collections of YAML files, because Kustomize comes with the ability to decorate that with a bunch of metadata, and it serves as an extension point for anybody to modify those YAMLs. It's kind of like a nice gesture. And it's like, if you just want to use it as a collection of YAML files, like nothing is stopping you from doing that. Right? It's pretty thin stuff. But like when we talk about a lot of the other motivations, like Jeff merged the patch support, and you can imagine that you would probably want to have, the support for people specifying, oh, I want this secret included in my deployment, or I want, this config map to be user specified. Mm-hmm. And like those kinds of things they have almost supports for assembling the structures, and it's not templating. It's like actual indirection that is specified and documented. So it's kind of cool. But, yeah.
All right, well, I think that's pretty much all I had on that. Might keep noodling around with that and see where it goes.
Yeah, I guess the next step would be just to try and plumb it in to Kustomize itself. Since, I mean, it seems like you built everything that's pretty much needed, at least from like a baseline. There's probably like,
I think so, yeah.
You can use other tools to like add labels and stuff. The thing that was interesting about using the Docker build was that you could actually like go from one customized package, and then you could like layer on top of it using the file system. I don't know if that's like really a great abstraction to be adding in to like Kustomize, but it was there and interesting.
So yeah, I did talk to some OCI folks about this. There are a bunch of different ways you can like put data into an OCI image. The way this particular one is doing it is taking each YAML file and putting it into a separate layer. And that's so that on the back end, you can store them by digest and get some deduplication if you're storing a lot of packages that happen to share the same set of manifests for some overlap. If you start talking about layering like a file system on top, then you pretty much, it's possible that you'll have some overlap, but it's a lot less likely, I think. So that was the reasoning there. I don't know.
I imagine that the tool either treats duplicates as an error or just takes the latest one.
That's
Probably
a good question.
When it's unpacking, it probably just does the last one. Right, is it ordered or did you use coroutines?
I used ORAS. I should emphasize how little additional work on top of ORAS is required to do this. This is pretty much piping things through that. So
Cool.
I don't remember what ORAS does on that particular part.
I'll need to read into that. But yeah. Cool. Thank you so much for taking this task, because it was kind of like a what's going to happen here area.
Yeah, no problem.
And now it's like, oh, there's not that much work to do all of a sudden. So it's going to be like write a parser for customize and import it.
Yep.
All right. If no one else has other comments for the immediate thing, then just like, I don't know, message Evan. The only other thing I had was that there was some interesting feedback from having the add-on installer be reviewed by the kubeadm maintainers. I don't think Ilya's on the call here right now. Justin, you're obviously a COPS maintainer. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the add-on installer POC, but we've said before that we're interested in some shared implementation details. So I guess I could probably share my screen here. Let's do desktop 1. And then I learned this new Firefox feature. You can like autocomplete if you put a %. It's kind of nice. This is the add-on installer. I refresh this page. So Fabrizio has been like the main person reviewing this for inclusion into kubeadm, and he had a bunch of questions. One of the main ones was just like, how can kubeadm using the library control the kubeconfig that's in use? And I wasn't super positive like what the best UX for the library is here. I think like the most Golang native thing would be to provide like a struct member where you could pass a kubeconfig type, but that requires the caller to deserialize the kubeconfig and pass it in, which is like kind of arduous and like requires importing a bunch of libraries and stuff. So then the second thing I was thinking is, oh, well, you could pass a file name here, or we could maybe provide the ability to do both. The way I've been doing it has just been setting the kubeconfig variable, but I mean, asking a library caller to modify an environment variable so that something can be used doesn't make sense. So,
if I may add something, I have a more general concern. I'm trying to understand which level of abstraction the add-on installer will give to kubeadmin. I'm trying to make an example. For instance, let's think about the kubeproxy plugin. Okay, kubeadmin basically does two things. One, ask to the user a component config, and then it passes to the kubeproxy config. So I have to somehow make user configuration flow to my add-ons. Okay, this is a requirement that we have in kubeadmin. I think that this is a requirement that should apply to everyone using the add-on installer. What I'm trying to understand is if the add-on installer somehow hides to me the complexity of the or the structure of the underlying add-on, or I need as a kubeadmin I need to know how the kubeproxy add-on is implemented. So I need to create a patch to know the exact resource name, and so on and so on. That means that how tight, how coupled will be kubeadmin with the implementation of the YAML for the kubeproxy. Because if we are too coupled, this is a problem. Every time one change, the other should change. If the add-on installer somehow establish an interface that couples the two things, this is helpful. And this is and the same applies not only for the init, so for the first installation of the add-on, but also for the life cycle of the add-on. But somehow during the add-on, the life cycle of the cluster has to upgrade the add-on. So ideally, I would like to call the installer and ask for a new version of the add-on without caring where this version maps inside the bunch of YAML that defines the add-on. So
yes.
My generic question is how the add-on installer, let me say, helps the installer consumers to be abstract from the YAML.
Yeah, thanks for explaining it very eloquently. I can like very clearly understand what your question is asking. So I think the separation of concern really, and you've pointed out something that's probably more controversial that I didn't realize, but is that when kubeadm currently is concerned with installing add-ons, it has its own plumbing for the add-ons component config. But in the future, with the add-on installer, what is being proposed is that kubeadm is not concerned with what add-ons are installed, but rather that it provides the config to do so, which means that the component configs should be managed and specified with the add-ons themselves.
I understand, so I agree, and this is interesting. So
it is interesting, yeah.
Yes, having the add-on installer will let kubeadmin to easy switch the add-on that I install by default.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But if I look at this from a kubeadmin user perspective,
yeah.
they want to call kubeadmin init and pass everything is needed for getting the control plane working. So the kubeadmin user should not even know that kubeadmin is calling the installer.
Yeah, well, the user can. So right now, right, like the user doesn't have to know that kubeadm is going to configure kubeproxy with the kubeproxy configuration. But then they can use the kubeadm config file to pass a new kubeproxy configuration, and then kubeadm will plumb that in. So I think the new UX would be that they can write an add-on installer configuration and pass that in the kubeadm config file. And then all of the behavior contained within that would basically be executed.
Yeah, I just add, I think it is also important to like match the existing workflows. So where there is an existing kubeadm configuration file that doesn't specify the kubeproxy add-on, but does in the add-on style and the component config style, but does specify it in the directly in the kubeadm configuration. We would imagine that, or I would imagine the way that would work is kubeadm would sort of transparently convert that into a kube proxy component config, and rather than execute it directly, would instead execute the add-on tool as if the user had specified it. So the user can still specify, you know, the inline kube proxy configuration they know and love for the options that are available today, and it is executed using the add-on operator. And then when they want to do more advanced customization, or they can split it out and stop using the inline kube proxy configuration and instead switch to sort of component config add-on configuration.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I agree. Already in the latest version of the kubeadmin config, we already have split in several documents what is specific for kubeadmin and what is the kube proxy component config. So it is already isolated from the rest. The point is, okay, I have to recognize this is a kube proxy component. I have to pass to the add-on for the kube proxy. But my point is, I can pass to the add-on installer, and then the add-on installer, let me say, take responsibility of map this component config with the bunch of YAML that exists inside, or kubeadmin should understand and be synchronized with the YAML structure.
Like, what for what? Why does kubeadm need to know the internal structure of the add-ons?
If I look at the current implementation of the add-on installer, the add-on installer is just calling customize. That means that the responsibility of creating a patch for the kube proxy component config is up to kubeadmin. That means that kubeadmin should know and be aligned to the structure of the kube proxy component of the kube proxy add-on. So
yeah, like basically the name of the config map needs to be correct.
Yes, but I think that we can agree in some more generic, let me say, way to pass configuration to the add-ons, so the consumers should not be responsible for the add-ons internals. There are for two main problems. The first one is the configuration, and the second one is the version for the upgrades. Assuming that the upgrades are only a change of a version, because when we talk about add-on, we talk also about add-on operators, and I don't understand how they get into the picture.
Yeah, so for something like Core DNS, the machinery that we've prototyped is that there is a custom resource definition called a Core DNS, and that custom resource definition is capable of defaulting the config and specifying like what service IP should be used in the cluster, that kind of thing. But also the operator is able to deduce those things from the cluster. So the operator that uses that CRD is capable of orchestrating all of the finer details of making sure that Core DNS stays running, including things like in the scope of a config file version upgrade and that kind of thing. Or creating a new deployment and then shifting the service to the new deployment.
But that means that you are foreseeing that the upgrade of the add-ons should be separated from the upgrade of the control plane?
So for the Core DNS add-on, an upgrade would look like using the add-on installer to install a newer version of potentially a newer version of the operator, and absolutely like a version bump on the CRD. So there's an existing CRD in the cluster, and then like, okay, we want to move it to, core DNS fee, whatever. Like we can change the field value in the CRD
But
or in the custom resource.
this is not yet in the add-on POC.
The upgrade portion of it is not part of the operator. No, it is not built currently.
What we do, if you bump the version, it will upgrade if you bump the version in the core DNS one, it will install the new version. Currently, they're all baked into the image, so it's a little academic. But yes, we talked about like we need to split that out so that it actually is more useful, and you don't have to rebuild an image every time. But you can rebuild an image every time. Bump the version, it will update.
Yes. Sorry. I guess more accurately, we haven't built any special logic beyond just like having a new version of the image.
Yeah.
So we're not doing like a core file upgrade or anything like that now.
I understand the general direction. I'm only a little bit concerned about the usability of this. So if I assume could mean capable to install any add-ons, the user any add-ons the user choice to install. I do expect that there should be, let me say, common pattern for installing those add-ons, configuring them, and upgrading them. Because if each add-on, if core DNS has its own story, if kubeproxy has its own story, and so on, basically, it does not hold the idea that kubeadmin can install any add-on, because they have different operation process.
Right, and we're using duck typing, so we're defining standard fields, at least for the version, and for the version spec and version status. So you'll be able to, like, the version that you want to apply will always be in spec.version, is I think the current field. References to configuration, yes, we probably should have a reference to the component config. I think that's a good idea. I don't know if it's as important to standardize that, but I'm very open to that idea.
And then the fact that we're using a customized installer to actually specify the add-ons and how it's extended. So things like, normally before, like if you're just working with anonymous Kubernetes YAMLs, knowing the structure of those YAMLs, it's like very important because people might have prefixes on the names and all of that kind of thing. But when you're working with the customized installer, all of those details are kind of pushed towards the end when it's actually built and constructed, which means that you get like the minimum expression of the application is what's encouraged. So something like the config map for kubeproxy could literally just be called config inside of the base, customized base, right? And that keeps all of your references in code and stuff like very like minimally coupled, right? So that there aren't all of these other like decorating things that you have to take into consideration. And that should be per add-on, right?
Yes.
And then if people want to compose these things into like higher aggregations, like somebody might have an add-on set, right? That's a customizer. Nothing prevents people from doing that. But
okay, this makes sense. Define few well-known contact points for the init scenario, for the upgrade scenario.
It does, yeah. I think the minimum like kind of overlap that we're seeing so far on like what does it look like to work with versioning and with installing and upgrading is exactly what the add-on installer is about, because currently kubectl apply like isn't enough for people. They like a lot of people who want to install an add-on have to go manually edit files and all of that kind of thing right now, and so upgrading to the customizers allows people all of that UX.
Okay, and the last, just to discuss the feedback on the POC, the last comment that I remember, which is important, is about air-gapped environment and the story about how the user should prepare his environment for Kubernetes Mini if it is in an air-gapped environment, and packaging manifest into an image is an interesting option for this.
I agree that that's something that is most in line with what Kubernetes is currently doing, is for people to basically clone the images that are used for the customized packages, similar to the tooling that Evan just showed off.
Yeah, there is another option as well, which is to register the open source K8s cluster bundle objects into the cluster itself. So that's github.com Google Cloud Platform K8s-cluster.bundle, I think. That's another option, but yes, either via assuming you have image mirrors or by registering the bundles as CRDs. I think either one of those works great.
Or just git clone to a management laptop works well too. Chances are, if you are in a sophisticated air-gap environment, you probably already have control repos for your infrastructure and all that. So just checking in the customizers into those control repos also makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. We are pretty sure that the user in a air-gapped environment already have a private Docker registry for images.
Yeah,
so,
probably more than a registry. They probably
yes.
have a registry, a Git repo, like a...
Yes, but in terms of, if you think in terms of user instruction, if you tell them clone 5 images, so pull locally 5 images or 7 images, it is a small change. If you tell them pull 5 images and then clone a repo, it is another step.
I agree with what you're saying. I think the minimum, or the first thing we should point people to, assuming that Kustomize accepts the patches for the OCI support, is to use the images. But the great thing about the UX is that it is flexible to however the operator wants to put things together. So in the air-gap environment, there's probably other things that people would want to use as well that aren't images. Since these happen to be manifests in the cluster, they probably want to check them in with their other manifests. So that is an option for people. That could be probably the second thing in the documentation.
Okay, thank you for the discussion. Really interesting.
Fabrizio, did you have an opinion on the kubeconfig thing? Like, do you think we should pass it in as a field member, or do you think a file name is okay?
To be honest, I have no strong opinion. I think that if the interface is so simple, probably it is the same. We are already vendoring. We are starting to vendor customizing inside Kubernetes Mini. And if it is only a matter of call customize apply, we can even skip the Addon in its current form. But really, it depends by how this contact, this touch point for passing config and for passing for doing upgrade, we will take forms.
Yeah, I need to look at the customized UX that you built recently for the API server and etc. That sounds really interesting. Okay. Justin, in kind of talking about like how all of this stuff improves and is also dissonant with current Kubernetes features, like how do you feel about what add-on installer looks like being used with kops?
I was just thinking, like, I need to actually try it out. I feel like Kops has a different spin on things, and so yeah, it would be. We need to. I'm thinking of like node local DNS is the one that might be the first one. We don't yet have it really in Kops, so I'm going to try it out and see if we can get it integrated in. Because
I think there's a 116 kept for node local DNS to be included in all of the installers. So that would be both.
Oh, good, cool.
So if we could knock it out with the add-on installer using Kustomize, then that would, or an operator installed by Kustomize.
Yeah, that would be cool. All right, I will. Yeah, I definitely need to. I'll take an action item to like look at that. I think it's a good one. Yeah, because a lot of these concerns, I'm sure they're valid for Kubernetes, but they don't necessarily speak to me as much. So I'm sure Kops will have its own challenges, but I think it sounds like there are different challenges.
I'm sure the EKS users would also be equally interested in being able to install the node local DNS, since it's so critical for performance and a scaled TS cluster. So,
if I may ask, Justin, how Kops install and configure the add-ons?
So we have a Kops configuration. We have a cluster configuration, which currently has sort of, we saw where 3 or 4 years ago when we started, I can't remember when, like component config was coming any day. So we basically embedded in a version of component config, which looked like where it was going. And they're currently all like in the cluster object. That was a mistake, which we'll address over time. But the Kops CLI tool, when you run it, it generates manifests, which are then applied, like literally applied. So today, that has some pretty big shortcomings. You have to update add-ons using the Kops command line tool. You can't do it sort of online. Like it would be nice to do just tweak a field on the node local DNS CRD and have it like enable the add-on, versus today you'd have to tweak that same field in the Kops cluster configuration and run Kops update. The other challenge is, suppose there's a new version of Calico. The manifests are currently baked into the Kops binary. So we have to update Kops, and then users have to run Kops update with the new version of Kops. So that's nice in that, you have stability of what the add-ons are, but it's not nice in that is a terrible workflow for a add-on update all around, like both for Kops developers and for Kops users.
Yes. At the end, Kops and Kubernetes are not so different. The only difference I got is that we already split the cluster configuration and the component configuration.
Yes, I do hope we complete our convergence. Like I think etcd manager is a big part of that. I think add-on operators are a big part of that. I think cluster API is going to be a big part of that. And then there will be, well, my hope is that actually both Kops and kubeadm end up as very, very thin shims over like these standardized components. And yes, then there will be, the difference will purely be like the flavor of shim you prefer. And ideally everyone stops using the shims and starts using the direct core.
Yeah, I mean the Kops project has a totally different and like much broader scope than kubeadm.
But I think if you think about kubeadm plus etcd manager plus add-on manager plus cluster API, then like that is effectively Kops. And so yes, I'd see it as like SIG cluster lifecycle. We're all gonna like the grand unification of SIG cluster lifecycle, maybe.
That's very poetic.
Yeah, yes.
I like where you're going with that, actually. I think you're right. So.
Thank you.
Cool.
While you still have your screen shared, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
One thing that's really interesting to me about this is that I think this is the first time that it's going to be easy to pull an add-on that someone has just published exterior to Kubernetes. Like previously, it's something you've vendored in.
Yeah, so that's the huge thing there, which is what is it? Opening this up enables kubeadm to execute different opinions of cluster bootstrap, right? So like vendors could do, right?
Right, exactly. There's just some stuff that I didn't see in this PR that I think are really important. That I think things like if it's an operator, it's talking to the Kubernetes API, so it has a requirement on the set of APIs that are provided. And then during an upgrade of either the component or the underlying cluster, you have to ensure that after an update, it still has access to all those things. So we need to know both what APIs are being deprecated and added between kube versions, and also which ones are being used in the add-ons. And I don't see anything addressed in that, but I know it kind of overlaps with some kube builder discussions too, if anyone wants to jump in.
So I think kind of the like dangerous like runtime Kubernetes philosophy would be let it fail. So if I deploy an operator that depends on, like apps v1 alpha 1, and then that gets deprecated in, kube 117, then that operator is now going to be incapable of interacting with the API, perhaps.
Yeah.
So it's going to then fall into a degraded state, hopefully. So like all of that stuff is really ugly. So what you're suggesting is kind of like with OLM, you were able to map the API dependencies, right?
Yeah, so that's what I was getting at, is like if there's some common ground in terms of exposing that type of information.
Do you think that those should be warnings at the install time, or should the installer just error?
I think the ideal scenario is that you are prevented from doing that, and like override it, sure, if you want to. But like we know that if an operator uses an API that no longer exists, it's not going to work properly, right?
Yeah, I mean, you'll either get the error from the installer or you'll get the error from the component at some point.
Right. So if your component is DNS, then might not be a thing you want to see fail at runtime. But
yes, that's a great point. I guess we could use some of the customized metadata to indicate API dependencies.
That would be a really interesting way to go.
Or we could just put it into we could say that that's an add-on installer thing, but then they would be so user specified,
Yeah.
So I know, Evan, you and I have talked a little bit about this in the past, and one of the challenges always, how do you even know which API changes are going to come down the second that you update the cluster? You'd have to have something formalized, right, to say this update to this core kube change is going to affect these things to be deprecated, these things to be removed, these new things coming in.
Yeah, and also
someone else knows of that thing existing, and I wasn't aware of such a thing existing. Yeah.
PSA is we are at time box as well if somebody needs to drop. I'm cool to keep talking, but yeah, that might not be true for everybody. But yeah, sorry, was that Jessica talking?
Yeah, it was.
I don't like how Zoom doesn't like highlight the speaker when you're in presentation mode. But yeah, I mean, I guess the best you have right now is like the release notes, right? For the Kubernetes version that you're targeting, like if you're upgrading API server, I suppose. Yeah,
I mean, you can pull the Swagger doc, I guess, from each release and get a good idea.
That's pretty good.
I don't know if if that captures everything. I think it does, but
so if I had to guess, like really, the only safety that we have currently in the community is that people during the release are testing these things, like with kubeadm and with COPS, and we kind of just canonically know, like, because we're involved in the community, like, okay, well, these are going to be the blessed release paths. And nothing's
we also
really,
frankly haven't really removed many APIs.
Yeah. So
We've migrated a lot of things from alphas into betas and changed fields in the process and things like that. But once they've gone beta GA, there's really not a lot that's been taken out.
yeah, in general, like because of the runtime nature of all of Kubernetes type system, like we don't really have a lot of tools right now that are promoting upgrade safety. It's really just kind of like statistically what we're releasing. And none of that with the add-on installer. I would assume, right, that a tool would provide a default add-on installer configuration and that you could use the tool's generation command line experiences to get the default.
Yeah. Yeah, and someone familiar with the right versions puts a list somewhere in GitHub or something like that, right? So you're
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the tool will, like for that Kubernetes version is going to have a default.
Right. Yeah, I guess I just at that point, I don't know if there's as much value in not letting you pull in whatever you want. I mean, I guess the value is still, if you know what you're doing, you can still override everything, which is.
Yeah. And I mean, if you are, if you're like, who are the people that wrote Flatcar Linux? Kinvolk? Like if you're Kinvolk or if you're the open source Typhoon project, right, and you want to use kops or EKS Cuddle or kubeadm, right, as part of your workflow, but then distribute all of these extra things, then you might choose to use the add-on installer configuration, to help with Bootstrap, and maybe that prevents you from having to write so much code. But yeah. Yeah.
And there's also a discussion in KubeBuilder around like potentially canonical metadata to collect for controllers. And so I might suggest that one of the things we care about is what APIs
are used.
And
make that so that when the controller is packaged, that there is some bit of metadata.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sound like with the current use of customize in KubeBuilder that we couldn't have some object or some fields in the customization to suggest that. Sounds like that would probably go over well.
Mm-hmm.
I like that because as things become more sprawled and we have individual components that people are selecting or not selecting, it's more important to know what APIs are in use by each component.
Yeah, especially if you think like the Typhoon use case, I think is an interesting one. Like you want to support that use case, but then I'm sure there's lots of people who want to do it like Typhoon, but with their own set of things. And like, it would be nice if we could help.
Yeah, the more shared bits people can use, the easier it is to fork, right?
Yep.
Like I could not, fork Typhoon in 2 hours right now because it wouldn't be possible to like know the directory structure and how things are being applied and all that. But,
right.
Maybe it's a little easier to search for an add-on installer configuration. Okay. Well, maybe at some point we'll get to sync with Ilya as well and ask him what his opinions are. EKS Cuddle is taking an interesting direction right now with integrating with the Git repo. So
look at that.
Cool. Well, did anybody from the OLM team or Jessica, Evan, did you guys have other things you wanted to bring up?
I think we're way over now, so.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for their time. This is a lot of interesting discussion today. Hopefully somebody took notes. Cool. Thanks.
Bye.
We'll see everyone in 2 weeks. Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot, everyone.